So sometimes when I tell people that no religious document is the exact word of God, people look at me like I'm Marvin the Martian.
And take it back with us.
For many people, without a background in research or criminal justice, I suppose it can be difficult for many to visualize all the potential distortions and inaccuracies religious documents face throughout their lifetime. Sometimes these mistakes are measured in a matter of decades that snowball over millenniums. However, typically, the older a document is, the more likely they face challenges surrounding their accuracy and authenticity via translations, interpretations, and just plain publishing or editorial errors that are scattered all throughout religious texts. The Urantia book is no different. At first, the messages that assisted in creating such a text were dictated from the unidentified sleeping subject, initiated by a Chicago psychiatrist by the name of Dr. William Sadler, with its contents shifting in 1925 to a voluminous handwritten document up until the year 1934. In 1935, the rest of the Urantia book, the Life and Teachings of Jesus section, simply materialized a year later by some mysterious method. Despite being written by over 10 classes of celestial beings with 3 separate accumulation processes, much of the material presented in oral and written accounts were in some way created through a third-party midwayer group. Midwayers are a type of entity that exists somewhere between the realms of spiritual and material existence, and they have a slightly higher intellectual capacity than we do. So please keep that in mind when you're reading these documents. They can and do make mistakes. Yeah, like the Lucifer Rebellion? The following video examines the intersection of Larry Mullen's historical critique, the purported deteriorating health of the last influential contact commissioner, Emma Christie Christensen, and the internal revelations of Carolyn Kendall's 1996 plan paper. Carolyn is not just a researcher, but was a deeply connected figure associated with the Urantia book. They were the daughter of Clarence Bowman, who served on the forum itself between the years 1923 to 1959, joining the forum herself in 1951. In addition, she was actually an employee of Dr. William Sadler intermittently between the years 1952 and 1957, and was an active member of the Urantia-related foundations and societies up until 2005. And of course, there's much more to her background that I am not revealing for brevity's sake that I encourage you guys to look up yourselves. This document explores the transition from the inviolate 1955 first edition to the era of unauthorized alterations that arguably reshaped the fifth apocryphal revelation. Now, granted, I would have to agree that these changes or alterations did not substantively change the document or its overall message. Even some of the worst 1999 copies most certainly still convey the same overall message and themes. However, for those of you out there looking to split hairs surrounding the identified mistakes in the Urantia book, seeing such publishing errors might grant you a change of perspective as to whether such related errors were mistakes in receipt, translation, or through editing this massive text. Even considering the original 1955 edition, these potential errors are still in question. Part 1. The Inviolate Standard of 1955. In the quiet, wood-paneled rooms of 533 Diversey Parkway in Chicago, Illinois, a profound confidence resided with the original contact commissioners. By the time the first copies of the Urantia book rolled off the presses in 1955, the small group of humans who had facilitated the revelation believed they had fulfilled a celestial mandate that would eventually change the world. Central to this belief, as Larry Mullins details in A History of the Urantia Papers, was the physical, tragic reality of the printing plates. These were not mere digital files or mobile type. They were nickel-plated stereotypes. heavy and permanent, intended to serve as the master from which all future printings would flow. Mullins argues that the 1955 publication was never intended to be perfect, at least with the notion of it having a human sense of grammatical polish or scientific precision. Please remember, there was no substantial backing surrounding the publication of this document, and most of the editors were volunteers. So just to let you guys know, when it came to me doing the research for this video, I came across the slow, arduous process for raising funds associated with the first printing of the Urantia book. I think the first time they were able to get around $20,000 together, and the second publishing attempt, I think the goal was about $50,000, which they were just shy of. They almost made it, though. I think it was like $49,000 and change. So it wasn't easy. This being, of course, the initial red flag surrounding the original authenticity that we are all looking for. This might seem like a trivial matter for those of you that have never done volunteer work. So let me try to break things down for you. This means that these individuals were not compensated for their time and had to rely on either their own full-time jobs or other people's generosity to sustain such volunteer work. This means long hours of work along with many forms of likely distractions during the editorial process, along with potentially lacking hierarchy and, of course, oversight. So, of course, despite these limitations, the original 1955 publication should be considered canonical. The Revelators had purportedly overseen the production process, and according to Mullins, the presence of certain inconsistencies, typographical errors, varying spellings, and idiosyncratic phrasing was an intentional safeguard. These flaws were designed to prevent the book from becoming a supernatural fetish or a perfect idol. These Revelators wanted the truth of the message to transcend the medium of the text. Now, of course, I'm not buying this argument for 1 second. However, we can't refute the reality that these grammatical errors and, of course, inconsistencies, they really do provide a unique thumbprint when it comes to the text itself. And, of course, that it embraces the limited scientific understanding of the early 20th century. However, as Mullins points out in his analysis of pages 225 to 248, the period following the 1955 publication saw a gradual erosion of this inviolate doctrine. The original commission members, Dr. William S. Sadler, Bill Sadler Jr., Anna Rawson, and Emma Christensen, who was known as, of course, Christie, initially held a firm line. The text was not to be touched. But as the 1950s turned into the 1960s, the old guard began drawing thin. Bill Sadler Jr. passed away in 1963, followed by Dr. William Sadler in 1969. This left Christie as the final living link to the invisible authors, the sole human occupant of the bridge between the Celestial Commission and the burgeoning Urantia movement. Part 2, The Twilight of the Last Commissioner. Emma Christie Christensen was more than just a secretary to Dr. William Sadler. She was the heart of the movement. She had worked for the Federal Reserve Bank in Chicago prior to being injured in an automobile accident, which is how she met the Sadlers in the first place. The Sadlers, being very fond of Christie, chose to unofficially adopt her and allowed her to live at their residence during such a time. She had lived at 533 Diversey for decades, serving as the custodian of the plan, the set of instructions given by the Midwayers and other celestial beings regarding how the book should be managed. As she entered her 80s and, of course, 90s, her physical health began to decline. A transition that Mullins and Kendall suggest provided the opening for a new generation of trustees to assert their own vision for the book. By the 1970s, Christie's deteriorating health was becoming a factor in the governance of the Urantia Foundation. Though she remained the spiritual matriarch, the administrative machinery was increasingly handled by younger trustees who were further removed from the original revelatory process. It was during this time that Christie's fragility came to a head, and that the unauthorized changes identified by Mullins began to solidify as standard practice. According to Carolyn Kendall's 1996 paper, The Plan, there was a specific publication mandate that emphasized slow growth and a gentle approach to dissemination. Kendall, who had served as an office manager and longtime observer of the internal politics at 533 Diversity, highlights that the original plan did not call for the rapid standardization or improvement of the text. Instead, it focused on the preservation of the original papers. Kendall's paper reveals that the plan was increasingly ignored in favor of institutional expansion and a desire to make the book more palatable to a modern audience. Part 3, the 1967 revisions, a semantic shift. The first major break in the 1955 standard, of course, transpired with the second printing in 1967. Mullins characterizes this as a watershed moment. Under the guise of simple typographical correction, the Foundation introduced several semantic shifts that Mullins argues altered the book's higher logic. One of the most contentious changes was the deletion of the word other in the forward section located in 01.19. The 1955 text spoke of a relative perfection in all other manifestations. By removing the word other, the editors changed a specific logical contrast into a generalized, absolute statement. To a casual reader, this seems trivial. To a scholar like Mullins, it represented a human mind attempting to fix a divine logic it did not fully comprehend. Another change involved the quiet zone between space levels located in 11.7.7, which was pluralized to quiet zones. While in 1967, editors argued that this was a grammatical necessity to match the verb are. Mullins points out that the original 1955 spatial geometry, the quote-unquote zone, might have referred to a singular, continuous field of energy. By changing the word, the humans were effectively redrawing the map of the master universe. Now, granted, these changes did occur when Christie was still alive. But this was also the time when she was increasingly isolated by her age. Mullins suggests that while Christie might have signed off on corrections, that the scope and nature of these revisions were often presented to her in a way that downplayed their significance. And just be crystal clear to everyone here, I actually had to use artificial intelligence to help decipher to me what these changes signified and represented. So of course I can empathize with Christie here as to what she had to go through when trying to make these last-minute decisions, especially in her 80s and, of course, early 90s. Initially, these revisions also sounded trivial to me as well. But unfortunately, such even trivial revisions can have catastrophic consequences. The inviolate nickel-plated electrotype stereotypes of the 1955 were eventually discarded or lost, and the book was retypesetted. This, of course, increases the ambiguity as to what plates are actually vaulted at the Urantia Foundation. This physical destruction of the original plates was, for Mullins, the moment the lost link to the revelation actually occurred. In addition, this reality makes the original 1955 published text so valuable. Intriguingly, the Foundation on its history page indicates, I quote, metal printer plates bearing the complete text of the Urantia book, just as it had been received, were bequeathed to the Urantia Foundation upon its incorporation. Then, later stating that, the original metal printer plates have been superseded by modern technology. But Urantia Foundation continues to ensure that the text remains inviolate, greatly raising the ambiguity of all of this. Kendall's paper clearly states the plates were destroyed between the second and third printings of the Urantia book in 1971. New offset printing technology had made the old letterpress plates obsolete. In my mind, if Carolyn's statement is accurate, this greatly increases the value of not just the first edition of the Urantia book, but the second edition as well that was published in 1967. Part 4. The Era of Unauthorized Alterations, 1967 to 1999. 1967 was perhaps the most innocent set of revisions prior to just before the Y2K.
That's year 2000 for you whippersnappers out there.
That were born after the new millennium. Following Christie's death in 1982 at the age of 92, the constraints of the original commission were gone. The period from 1982 to 1999, which Mullins critiques heavily, saw a proliferation of what he terms as unauthorized alterations. These were often justified by the standard reference text, also known as the SRT movement, which sought to create a perfect version of the book by reconciling internal inconsistencies. One such alteration involved the terminology surrounding the apostles in the 12. In several instances, the 1955 text used these terms in specific, perhaps nuanced ways that didn't always align with the rigid counting of the 12 individuals. In fact, if you were a fan of my Abner video, you'll know that once Christ Michael assimilated John the Baptist's followers, Jesus had much more than 12 apostles. Later editors swapped these terms to ensure a neat, consistent count throughout the Jesus papers. Mullins argues that this human-driven consistency actually stripped the text of its historical texture and its human celestial, collaborative feel. I also argue that such nuances in the original 1955 edition had a purpose, likely both having meaning and significance for those Urantia scholars out there that can actually make sense of these initial misperceived inaccuracies. Again, these differences should make sense to you if you understand the totality and context of the entire text. Carolyn Kendall's 1996 paper adds a layer of institutional critique to this timeline. She describes a estrangement between the Urantia Foundation and the Urantia Brotherhood, fueled in part by these textual changes and a move toward autocratic control. Kendall argues that the plan specifically warned against the fossilization of the movement into a rigid top-down organization. Yet the drive to standardize the text was symptomatic of exactly that fossilization. The plan called for the revelation to be lived, but the New Guard was more concerned with polishing it. Mullins highlights between the years 1967 to, of course, 1999. Hundreds of minor changes were made. Capitalization, punctuation, and word choice that collectively shifted the tone and authority of the book. The authoritative voice of the 1955 Revelators was gradually replaced by the voice of a modern editorial board. For Mullins, the unauthorized nature of these changes was not just a legal or administrative issue, it was a spiritual transgression. Part 5, the legal fallout in the public domain. The tension between the inviolate 1955 text and the later revisions eventually culminated in the legal battles of the 1990s. The Urantia Foundation's attempt to assert copyright over the text and thus control who could publish it and in what form led to the landmark Michael Foundation case. Mullins argues that the Foundation's decision to alter the text actually weakened their copyright claim. In legal terms, if the 1955 text was a divine revelation and therefore not subject to human copyright, or if it was an inviolate work that had since been significantly altered by humans, the Foundation's standing was of course compromised. In 1955, a federal court did exactly that and ruled that the copyright was invalid, effectively placing the book in the realm of the public domain. This fate was sealed in 2001 after associated appeals were unsuccessfully attempted. Kendall's paper reflects the internal heartbreak of this era. She describes a community torn apart by litigation and a leadership that had lost sight of the plan. The publication mandate, which was supposed to be the North Star for the movement, had been buried under piles of legal briefs and editorial proofs. As an effort to supply you guys with some editorial references here as to how bad these transgressions were, I have supplied 3 for you. After reviewing the Truth Book page concerning alterations to the Urantia book since the first edition. All right, number 1, scientific revision of proton weight ratio. In paper 42, 6.7, the original 1955 text indicated the weight of a proton is less than 2 to 3,000 times that of an electron. In the revised version, the weight of a proton is more than almost 2,000 times that of an electron. When it comes to the rationale behind all this represents a direct intervention by human editors to align the revelatory text with human scientific discovery. The Truthbook page notes that these revised wordings are most consistent with the statement in the paragraph following, and in accord with current scientific opinion, which places the ratio at approximately 1,836. By changing less to more and altering these numbers, the editors fundamentally changed the revealed scientific data. This is considered egregious because it suggests that the revelators made an error that humans needed to correct, thereby undermining the authority of the original text. Or was it the other way around? Could have been that the original editors were the ones that made the original errors, and these were just corrected. Who knows? We will never know. If it was part of an original error, then that might represent the 1930s scientific understanding, or perhaps some simple legibility issues. And please don't forget that conditions such as dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia, these are real conditions that human editors had to face before we had computers. But in the end, of course, like I said before, we will never know. Just as a side note, the almost 2,000 times more is currently being used in the Urantia Foundation's current electronic edition. Number 2, deletion of the manger detail in paper 119, 7.6. The original 1955 edition. These men of God visited the newborn child in the manger. In the revised edition, these men of God visited the newborn child. The phrase in the manger was, of course, deleted. The rationale surrounding this is a literal deletion of a descriptive phrase that links the Urantia narrative to the traditional Christian birth story of Jesus. While the Urantia book elsewhere emphasizes that Jesus was not born in a stable, the original text explicitly included this phrase in paper 119. Removing it entirely is a significant editorial decision that sanitizes the text of a specific detail. It is a distortion because it changes the narrative content of the original revelation to avoid perceived contradictions or cliches, rather than letting the original text stand as written. So not to worry, the Urantia Foundation is actually including the manger reference in their current edition. All right, number 3, chronological change from day to week in paper 168, 5.1. Now, this was a tricky one because this isn't really lining up the way that I thought. The original 1955 version, it was about the middle of the day. The revised edition, it was about the middle of the week. Rationale surrounding all of this. This change from day to week in paper 168, which discusses the resurrection of Lazarus and the subsequent events, is a substantial factual alteration. Changing a unit of time, especially in a narrative context regarding the movements of Jesus and his apostles, alters the reader's understanding of the sequence of timing of events. Such a change exceeds the bounds of spelling, capitalization, and punctuation, and represents an editorial attempt to fix what was perceived as a logical or chronological inconsistency in the original transcript. And this is where it gets tricky. All that I can find with regard to the Urantia Foundation's electronic version is in paper 168. There is a noon reference located in 168.0.1, a discrepancy that either suggests an error in my research regarding truthbook.com, or perhaps an actual third revision from day to week, now to noon, or perhaps a complete omission of the statement entirely. Summary of rationale. These 3 alterations are highlighted because they violate the standard of inviolability, often cited by Urantia students. According to Dr. William Sadler, one of the original contact commissioners, the editors were instructed that their job was strictly limited to spelling, capitalization, and punctuation. By altering scientific ratios, deleting narrative phrases, and changing timelines, The editors effectively acted as co-authors or correctors of a text that claimed to be a superhuman revelation. Do you guys finally see what I mean when it comes to all these distortions? This is just a religious text that was altered over the course of 30 years. Imagine much older references when it comes to other religious documents. I'm sure it is far worse. In their defense, similar errors could have been made also during the midware or initial editorial process as well. A tough pill to swallow for sure, but we will never know how distorted these messages are from the original author's vision. Conclusion, returning to the source. The Urantia Foundation currently uses the edition of the Urantia book, which was published in 2008. This edition features a standard reference text, SRT, which was developed to correct minor typographical, spelling, and grammatical errors from the original 1955 printing, while maintaining the authorized standard version. Today, the debate between proponents of the 1955 first edition and those who support the modern standard reference text remains one of the most significant schisms in the Urantia movement. For those that are looking to prove the legitimacy of the Urantia book, or for those in which seek to have such a document defend itself, such discrepancies make all the difference in the world. For those who claim to be spiritually led, splitting hairs arguably discounts the overall divine leading that the Urantia book claims to be the essence of spiritual growth in the first place. For spiritually led individuals, we simply believe that if it feels like it's right and resonates with us, that it's probably true, rather than focusing on trivial facts or a chain of custody in which the Urantia book, like all other religious texts, will always fall short of. Larry Mullen's A History of the Urantia Papers serves as a rallying cry for those who believe the 1955 version, with all its human-like imperfections, is the only authorized version of the revelation. However, I believe that the 2008 edition of the Urantia book, the current one that's being used by the Urantia Foundation, is an adequate addition. It removes most of those errors that were made over the 30 years. However, for those of you wishing for a few more gray hairs, or perhaps a nervous tick in your left eye, have at it when it comes to trying to fully compare these two versions. It should be noted that special editions of the 1955 publications can also be found on Indiegogo, known as the Inviolate
For the
text.
first time in 60
It was once
years.
a $30 investment that included shipping that I wish still existed. Now, only eBay merchants can be found offering what is little left of the original printing. Interestingly, the unsanctioned republishing organization made a claim surrounding the 60th anniversary of the Urantia book that back in 2015, that the reprint publisher made an offer to the Urantia Foundation to make these very affordable copies available, which was voted down in a board meeting that was followed up with in October. So the company ended up just doing their own thing and actually made those unsanctioned copies. Because again, there is no copyright. However, it looks like those printings eventually stopped, the numbers in which still remains a mystery when it comes to how many of those prints were actually made. This is really important stuff since copies of the original 1955 text is currently going for a whopping $750. And of course, the 2015-ish knockoff itself is actually going for $350, if you can believe that. Are people crazy? I mean, I'm in the wrong business here. Too rich for my blood, for sure. The narrative of Christie's final years, as she aged into her 90s, serves as a poignant reminder of the fragility of human stewardship. As the last contact commissioner, she was the dam holding back the tide of human editorial instinct. Once she passed, the plan, as described by Carolyn Kendall, was largely abandoned in favor of a more corporate, standardized approach. In Carolyn's conclusion section, she indicates that the Revelators advised that there should be only one Urantia social outreach organization. Unfortunately, the fellowship, in actuality, has two spiritual successors, the Urantia Foundation and the Urantia Fellowship, that have both been long stewards, claiming strong ties to the original publication process. For the modern reader, the 1955 first edition stands as a historical monument. A snapshot of a time when the celestial and the human met in the industrial heart of Chicago. The unauthorized changes of the following decades, while often made with the best of intentions, remain a testament to the eternal human struggle to improve upon the divine, often at the cost of the very nuances that make the revelation truly epochal. So how does that expression go again? The roadway to hell is paved in good intentions. Mullen's work, combined with Kendall's insider revelations, suggests that the path forward for the Urantia movement may require a backward glance, a return to the inviolate plates and the original blemished and profound text of 1955. Thank you again for watching today's video, your continued support, and I'll see you on the next one.